Recording in progress. Right, I heard some of it. He's on the street.
Right there.
Oh, right there.
You want to?
No, I'll let you.
Well, I don't want to start me. Oh, I see. Oh. So, yeah.
I said they're working. If I go by and see, no, it's part of your book.
Chocolate.
Oh, okay.
She's supposed to find out when she. I
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I need those good. Thank you. So then, yes, and then,
Yeah.
worst case,
Years of service.
thank you. Yeah, I figured it was, well, my fingers. I don't know, I'm trying to calculate the hours. I think it's a way over how.
Yeah, we figured 500 hours.
Thank you. Oh, great. Yeah. And we should be stretching.
I was wrong. I still have. For this guy. I just heard of this guy, so that's fine.
Well, being a local person,
I don't.
yeah, right, Tom? Okay, so wait. Sure. With that, I already have this. Yeah, I brought all of my. I brought all of my old. General kind of instructions. I have an entire box. Or do I have to take it? Well, you know, all the stuff in it. No. It's not. I mean, Angela put some of it. Okay, now, if you want a really big piece of over. If I'm a real good expert in gardens.
I don't think either of us is to share the same.
The Honda trade.
Are you getting the audio going, Anton? Are you getting the audio? Okay, Jennifer. Jennifer just texted. I can't hear anything.
So are we ready to go?
Just a reminder, the sound quality of the Zoom and the recording last time was hit and miss. So just trying to remember that.
Okay, thank you. All right, good evening, everyone. This is the December rescheduled meeting of the Trinidad Planning Commission on Wednesday, December 14th. First item on our agenda is a roll call.
Commissioner Johnson,
Here.
Commissioner Higgins,
Here.
Commissioner Hopkins,
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Cole, Commissioner Stocks.
Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda is approval of one set of minutes from our last meeting on October 19th, 2022. Are there any questions, comments, corrections to the minutes? Hearing none and seeing none. Okay.
Okay, so. Page. Seven. It's just 1, 2, 3.
Diane, could you speak up just a little bit? I suspect that we weren't going to hear it.
Okay, so it's 1, 2, 3. It's a bit critical. There was a discussion about ADA compliance versus reasonable accommodation. So ADA provision is mandatory. And so the reasonable accommodation will that it's voluntary. Is that right, members?
Yeah, so this reasonable accommodation we're talking about is requested by the property owner or the tenant.
Okay.
As opposed to something that is mandated on a business to have ADA accessibility.
Okay, and then what was that acronym HCD?
Permanent housing and community development.
Okay, and then what's there? Okay, so it talks about the ordinance, primary residence. And then, the non-primary residents are those yards.
Secondary dwelling.
On the property, but not an ADU.
An ADU, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so on the second paragraph on page 4, you look at the comment about posting. And there was consensus to not include a requirement to know neighbors of reasonable accommodation requests. But later on in one of the packets, I think it was the community design, the neighbors posted.
Yeah, so that's different. So if a reasonable accommodation request would require a permit like design review, that still has to come to the planning commission. So this would be something that would be exempt from design review and normally exempt from permits. It could be approved administratively and neighbors would not have to be notified.
Okay, and then of course, I don't want to leave the commission without page 6. There was a discussion in October, commission noted vegetation maintenance is a topic of significant public interest. The commission changed the horizontal reference to vegetation management plan. So we're not going to have a plan because that would make the city do.
Yeah, so we changed it to not that the city would have a vegetation management plan, but that they would manage vegetation in a certain way.
Okay, I think that was enough. Okay. Richard and Laura, thank you.
Okay, any other questions, comments, corrections? Hearing and seeing none. Just a motion to approve the minutes.
I would approve the minutes. That's
Second that.
Move in second. Any further discussion?
Hearing none.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Yes, are approved unanimously. And just for the record, I would just like to make a couple of comments before we move on. First of all, again, for the record, thank you, Diane, for your service. Really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, we've been here together quite a while.
Well, a few years.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
The other thing, I just wanted to congratulate those who were reappointed or appointed to the commission for starting in 2023. Commissioner Hakkinen has been for the first full term. Thank you very much. And Chris Slay, who was there, I think he's there somewhere. Congratulations, Christopher. Thank you very much for signing up, and we look forward to meeting and working with you next month. So thank you very much. Great. Okay.
And then congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah.
And one more thing.
We having some technical difficulties.
I think so.
Wait.
They're working on it. And last night, council meeting. I and Cheryl and Gabe are.
Well,
It's meeting it, that's Cheryl Kelly, which one is I?
when you say this one. Don't even. Got that. Yeah. There it is. Okay. Thank you. Okay, there's more cake if you want to.
Box.
It's working.
We're back on.
Looks like it.
There's an echo here.
There's an echo.
A little bit of a delay coming. I don't know if it's
A little bit of latency.
with the two city clerk up. Could that do it or
Yeah.
you only need to answer once?
Okay, are we ready to proceed?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, I just had one more thing I'd like to say. I just wanted to thank staff, both here and not here, for all their hard work this year. Really appreciate it. And I think we accomplished a great deal this year. And again, thank you very much for your help and assistance in doing so much. Really appreciate it. And pass that on to those members of the staff who are not here, physically here. So thanks. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on, where there is an echo. Approval of the agenda. We have 3 items on our agenda for public hearing, discussion, decision, and action tonight. Are there any suggested corrections or changes to the agenda? Hearing none or seeing none, do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as written?
So make a motion to approve. This agenda.
I'll second that.
Okay, moved and second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, seeing none. All in favor say aye. Opposed? Agenda is approved unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, next item is items from the floor. This is an opportunity for any member of the public to address the Planning Commission on any item other than those which are on our agenda this evening. And I would request that you keep your comments to a maximum of 30, excuse me, 30 seconds. 3 minutes. Is there any public comment at this point? Hearing none, seeing none, we'll move on then to the next item, which is agenda items. First one is housing related zoning ordinance update. And I'll let staff get a little work here.
I don't have a lot of new information to report. I basically just made the edits that we discussed at the last meeting. I looked at some additional ordinances and kind of read through the process and some additional edits as well. I spoke with the building official and the building code. So reasonable accommodation requests still have to meet the building code. So the building code has its own requirements for ADA accessibility and that sort of thing. So this will not apply as exceptions to the building. So I did clarify that. And then a question came up at the last meeting about what kinds of projects would qualify for a reasonable accommodation request. And I got some language from the San Luis Obispo County. I don't think we need to add something like this to our ordinance necessarily, but it's just an example to give you a little bit more context.
Okay, thank you.
That's it. So I'm just asking you to continue to read the ordinance, provide any additional feedback. If you're happy with it, then when you are ready to do so, you can recommend it to the city council.
Okay. Any comments, questions, clarifications from the commissioners for staff? I had just a general comment in the staff report. And on page 2, the adjustments prohibited. I think I understand why, and there may not be any way in which we can address it otherwise, but the sentence says adjustments may not include accommodations which would impose an undue financial or fiscal burden on, and I assume they mean the city. But the issue of undue financial or administrative burden. That's pretty vague. And I think I realize why it is vague, but at the same time, it's kind of in the eye of the beholder as to what would be a administrative burden. So I don't know, is there any way in which that could be crisped up, or do we want to leave it that way? I mean, I'm fine with it. It just presents to me kind of an open-ended way in which somebody could nickel and dime, quote unquote, the city for administrative work, and it may not be perceived as a small burden, but maybe a larger one.
So I'm not necessarily proposing this language, but that language already is in the ordinance on page 6. It's item E. And it's That does seem to be pretty standard language in these ordinances. I saw it in almost every ordinance, and I'm not sure exactly. I mean, I sort of understand the administrative frustration. So, you know, giving one person exception, does it mean you have to give everybody an exception? But that's not, I think this ordinance is written so that doesn't have to happen. I'm not sure why that language is in every ordinance, but it does seem to be there.
Well, yeah, maybe it's more of an editorial comment, but I'm just. Okay, thank you.
I mean, it doesn't have to be a finding. I could check with the city attorney whether he's comfortable just taking that out.
Well, item E on page 6 does indicate that it's interpretive case law, so I'll let him do that. Could be his interpretation. Okay, I'm fine with it. Yeah, that just raised. Okay, so this is fairly straightforward. As is customary, we generally just take it page by page. Is that acceptable to everybody? And if you have questions or clarification, request clarifications, then we'll take them as we need to. So we'll plow right into this. Page 1. Any comments or questions on page 1? Last time I did say at the bottom, policy HP 2.2, encourage. I still don't like encourage.
So I know, and I had that note, but I did not change it because that is the policy in the adopted housing.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. All right, thank you.
I guess I just have one comment on page 1 or an observation, and this is perhaps telegraphing where the rest of my comments are going to go tonight, but nowhere on page 1 does it talk about limiting primary and secondary residences of people in this this ordinance here in the whereas sections. It just talks about fair housing. So I just wanted to make that observation that in this section of the document, we don't have that limit. And then I guess I'll have more comments as we go on that subject.
Oh, you have more comments on that?
Yeah, as we get into the meat of
Okay.
ordinance, yeah.
Anything else on page 1? Page 2? Page 3? Page 4? Page 4. I had a comment on application requirements, item 1. Once again, it says payment of the fee established by resolution of the city council. An applicant may seek a reasonable accommodation for payment of fees. Do I interpret that to mean that the city council will establish a fee rate and then the applicant then can ask for a reduction in that payment?
That would be the idea, that although financial hardship is not a disability, I did see that in a couple of ordinances, and I think we discussed that at the last meeting, but it's certainly, but yes, that would be the idea.
I guess that's probably a result of my comment at the last meeting, just ensuring that whatever process we put in place doesn't have fees that are going to become a barrier to a fair housing opportunity for somebody. I guess a follow-up question on that for you, Trevor, for staff is, if let's say it's their primary residence and or they're just doing a standard variance that you anticipate being able to do administratively, that would just be a routine set of fees to Ross. He would go through it and that's that, right? So based off the project and whatever else he needed to do, versus if it's coming before the planning commission, then that automatically necessitates a $750 deposit, doesn't it? Down towards your time, and then we bill towards that, or help me understand.
No, so if the request was a structural addition that required design review, then yes, design review is required as part of it. But if it is more of an interior change or a ramp that wouldn't require design review, or a parking change in parking requirements, that would be
Same.
It would be a fee, yeah, so I imagine normally, for an administrative permit, there's one fee, and then if it has to go to the planning commission, there would be another fee. So I imagine there would be 2 tiers of fees for that, but it's not the $750 deposit.
Okay, but if it does have to come before us, then it will be a different.
I would assume
Potentially.
so,
Okay.
yes.
Got comments on page 4? Page 5?
So how does the commission feel about the language about seeking the reasonable accommodation for fees? And I mean, the question then is, do I approve that administratively, or does that have to go to the council? I'm not, I have to think about that.
I'm sorry, not quite following what you mean.
So the language, an applicant may seek reasonable accommodation for payment of fees as well. And I'm not sure if that's something I would approve administratively. I guess I'd have to think that through, how that process would occur.
You know, if the city council is establishing by resolution the fee schedule, then it would seem to me that any deviation from that should go to the city council.
Because normally, if someone doesn't want to pay fees, it normally goes to the council.
Right.
But Ross would know the fees, right?
Well, we haven't set them yet.
Oh, okay.
Okay, anything on 4?
But that would, since reasonable is used so many times in this, the city council would set what is reasonable and what isn't, basically, if somebody really wanted to push it. So then it would go before city council, everybody could talk about it and decide what is reasonable.
Yeah, so the fees would be set at a public meeting. Fees are generally have to be based on what it actually costs the city to process something. So, we kind of have to have an estimate of what that would look like. And that's, for planning projects that come to the planning commission, those are more difficult to predict, which is why it's a full cost recovery. So the $750 is a deposit, and then you pay the actual costs. Processing. This, I imagine, would be more of a set.
Further discussion on the site? Okay, moving on to page 5.
I guess I'll just go on record voicing, total opposition to number 9, verifying that it's a primary residence. I think that I just cannot accept nor wrap my head around differentiating between a primary and a secondary residence for somebody, and that one has to come before us and one doesn't. I don't see the logic between that. I question whether or not that would stand up in a legal challenge against the city. I think if the bulk of the commission decides to head that direction, I would encourage us to maybe check it with the legal counsel before. I just don't understand that logic, and it seems to me currently we don't have any that I'm aware of off the top of my head, accessible rentals in town. So if somebody wanted to turn an STR into that, for example, that's pre-existing and they want to make it accessible, we're putting a barrier in place by asking them to be handled separately and come before us instead of just being an administrative permit that they would receive if it was their primary residence. So I just have a lot of heartache, and I just can't support that.
So what I will say to that, I think that was a decision. That was sort of what the majority wanted last time. I don't necessarily have strong feelings either way. I could see both ways. I did see several ordinances that did require it had to be a primary residence period for a reasonable accommodation request. So I'm guessing it's legally defensible, but that would be a question for the attorney we could run by. In terms of STRs, and I think long-term rental to me is a little different than an STR. I wouldn't want somebody with an STR who can't meet the parking requirements, for example, say, oh, well, I want a reasonable accommodation request to reduce parking requirements. So I want to be careful to avoid that. But yeah, so I think you can do it. I think it's just a question of what the commission wants to do.
So what would happen if the property owner made the application for an auxiliary dwelling unit?
Well, so the ordinances I saw, it was generally the owner, but it could be on behalf of a tenant. So it could be a rental. But it might, in some of the ordinances I saw, even if it was a tenant, it had to be the tenant's primary residence. But you don't have to do that. Not every ordinance had that, so.
So are we getting confused between primary and secondary dwellings on a property, or are we talking primary residence that someone lives there on a regular basis versus?
I guess, well, yeah, I guess, am I confused on that? Are we talking, let's say I own 2 homes, one in Sacramento, and then I have a second home here. It's not my primary residence. The way I'm interpreting this, and if I'm wrong, then fantastic. I'd love to be wrong. Is that would need to come before the planning commission as this is written today. That's the intent, correct?
Yes, so it's not about an ADU.
Right.
It's about where you live.
And that's where I guess I have the heartache over this issue, is that I don't understand why it makes a difference if it's my primary residence or my secondary residence.
How do they know?
Because verification.
I mean, how would they know?
Well,
If we're not going to verify it, why have it in here? I guess would be my other
Well,
question.
yeah.
Well, we would, so, we do have in our STR ordinance to have a home share or the resident STRs, it has to be a primary residence. And so we did talk about, there are ways to verify that, but, the owner's exemption on your property tax bill, for example. So that's a primary way to verify.
I mean, I think my reason for suggesting this, or in our previous meeting, was just as a way to, I guess, I mean, maybe I'm pushing a larger agenda here of trying to encourage people to actually live in the city. And so, and my thought there was that people who are, this is their secondary home. I guess I would like to see, I mean, I guess I'm going to sort of say what I said last month, but I would like to see them try and make a reasonable accommodation for their disability using, without going beyond the bounds of our zoning laws and ordinances. Given that if they own 2 homes, maybe they should, I guess I expect them to have the financial means to do so. And I guess I don't see it as quite of a burden as it might be if it was someone's primary residence.
So yeah, it's not as much of a barrier because this is supposed to keep housing from being a barrier. And if it's a second home, then as much of a barrier. Yeah.
But you can't have one in both. You can't have reasonable accommodations in the primary and the secondary.
Well, this isn't like the physical ADU. This is like, if you have your primary residence in the Bay Area, and you might have a reasonable accommodation there, and then you have a second home here, a vacation home that you vacation in. That's what we're talking about.
So do the tax people follow that?
Well, you get a homeowner's exemption on property tax for your primary residence. So you only get one of those. IRS and or county.
Anyway, I mean, it is what it is. It's written. I just wanted to voice my objection, I guess, and provide that.
Yeah,
Again, and whatever. I mean,
no,
it's the will of the.
I appreciate that. I mean, I think, I guess I'd be curious to hear if there's any other strong opinions one way or the other from the other commissioners. Just so it's not just me and Aaron here.
No, I also don't want to bog down the meeting. This is just, I don't know why this grabbed me, but it just did for some reason.
Yeah.
So let me make sure I understand. I'm getting confused with the process. There are two pathways to get a reasonable accommodation. One is administratively. And then the other is you bring it to the planning commission. So if you bring it, and the way I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that this process right here is for administratively, correct? In other words, if you check all these boxes, it doesn't have to come to the planning commission.
Which boxes, 1 through
1 through 10.
10?
If it's your primary residence.
Well, no, I think you need to check all those boxes either way.
Either way. Okay.
And the request, it's not even necessarily as written here, it's really not even necessarily a public hearing. It doesn't even have to be a public hearing before the planning commission. You could have your own deliberative process that does not allow public.
I just point out item B in the review authority.
Exactly. That's just where I was going.
Okay.
Yeah,
So a request for reasonable accommodation that is not for the applicant's primary residence shall be reviewed and determined by the planning commission.
yes,
So I think you can get it both ways, as whether it's a primary or a secondary.
Yes, but then you have to come before the planning commission.
Right.
And my question is, why?
Well, and then I kind of go back to what Trevor's saying. Tristan, excuse me, Tristan.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, Robert. And that is if a person has the wherewithal that they have the ability to have a secondary resident, then perhaps it's not unfeasible that they would have to come to the planning commission for approval of that. It's a little bit different with a second home or a second residence. A budget, okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
it could be for a child, it could be for somebody in their, I mean, it's not necessarily for the owner. If my child or my spouse has a stroke and I'm just,
Yes, no,
needs a ramp.
those are the types of things
that's
popped into my head.
that's exactly right.
Or an inherited home where, and I don't know that a means test is necessarily, but I do want to say, I really appreciate Trevor's point of also not placing an end run for a property that normally would, an STR or something that just said, oh, if I say this, then I can get away with it administratively. That point Trevor made about the parking stuff, and that's a very real concern for me. So, but I guess that's kind of but it's okay. We can disagree. That's the whole point,
Well, okay, so from a practical standpoint, let's say a person has 2 homes. I get this through my head, 2 homes. He has a reasonable accommodation on his primary residence. And he is requesting a ramp on the second home. What you're saying is that there is only one reasonable accommodation that can be applied for an individual. Unless he comes to the planning commission for that second ramp at his secondary home.
that's how it's written now. Yes,
I guess reasonable accommodation, meaning like a variance, like you can
It's
still
an
build a
exception.
ramp as long as it's conforming, right? But he could have a ramp on both houses if one of them is conforming, but if he wants to have a variance, then it would come before us. Is that correct?
that's right. So it would be a ramp that doesn't meet setbacks, where, and one of the findings is, are there alternatives? Could you design a ramp and position it so it would meet setbacks? And if so, I would deny that administratively, I think, unless there was a good reason. Oh, well, it has to reach the parking spot or, something like that.
Okay.
I hope to move on.
Well, we do have to, I think we have to resolve this.
Okay.
That's reasonable catches it.
Yeah.
I just, then it's like, okay, it's fine to me if if somebody needs it and it's reasonable. And if somebody's again saying, that's not reasonable, and you shouldn't do it, then it's not a problem.
So you would just send it to the planning commission. You try to make an administrative decision.
So the way it's worded now is that if it's a primary residence, if it's someone's primary residence, I would make the decision, whether it's the owner or the tenant, it could be a tenant. But if it was the person's secondary residence, you would make the decision. And I think that process, so the planning commission can make decisions that aren't public hearings. So potentially it could be not a public hearing. You don't see that very often, but I'm pretty sure, you can have a hearing that you don't open to the public. So it doesn't have to, you don't have to open that can of worms for this.
So it's like a closed session.
The public could be here, you would be in a closed session, but they wouldn't have the opportunity.
So as a matter of maybe trying to figure out how to handle this, could we put something in that would suggest that, I'm looking at item B under review authority, a request for reasonable accommodation that is not for the applicant's primary residence shall be reviewed and determined by the planning commission, and then add something to the effect that, and the planning commission shall do whatever is necessary to accommodate the additional request for accommodation. For reasonable accommodation, excuse me. I mean, I see both sides of this. It's clear that we're trying to streamline the process and eliminate barriers. There's no question about that. But at the same time, I can understand that, someone who is asking for a second reasonable accommodation is a little bit different situation, perhaps, due to the fact that it's another residence.
But I don't necessarily think you should.
I know those are weasel words.
So Trevor, I'm trying to see if I can get to some language. If the primary residence comes to you, there's no variance required. There's no, it's a setback issue but there is an alternative, right? They want to put it here because it's the least expensive option, but they could do it and not violate any kind of our ordinances. You would administratively deny that?
Unless they could argue why it didn't work for them to meet the setbacks. Like I said, like it has to reach the parking space or something. We haven't had a lot of these come up. So
Again,
I don't know.
Because I'm wondering if I can get to a point where if there's some requirement or language in here that if there's a variance or if it fits neatly within the boxes and there is no other alternative, for a secondary, you see where I'm heading with that? I don't know if that's making it more complicated than it needs to be.
Well, I was thinking about Richard's suggestion where, okay, well, maybe you give more leeway for a primary residence than a secondary residence. But really, the findings are that there aren't other alternatives.
Do we have other, not that it's apples to apples, anything else in our city where primary versus secondary residence is a meaningful distinction? With STRs, obviously.
STRs.
The home share, that subcategory, yes, but anything else where that crops up?
Occupation, so to run a business from your home, it has to be your home. Yeah, so a couple of things.
So I'm just reading ahead just a little bit, and I'm on page 6 under findings. And so if we were sitting here and we had to adjudicate a certain situations, the first one says whether the housing, which is the subject of the request, will be occupied by the individual. It has nothing to do with primary or secondary. It's whether or not the person is occupying it. Okay, so we could check that box. Whether the requested accommodation is reasonable and necessary to make the housing available to an individual with disabilities protected under the Act. That's clearly defined elsewhere, so that's not a problem. Whether the requested accommodation would, under circumstances of the particular case, materially adversely affect the health and safety, et cetera, et cetera. I think we could leave it the way it is. And when you do your findings, it becomes very clear that I don't think it really matters. Does anybody see anything in here that would suggest that whether or not it's a primary or secondary, that we couldn't make the finding? And it was kind of going back to what I was trying to say, weasel words. How do you make a finding? And I don't see anything here that would suggest that we couldn't do that.
No, and I agree. I see no reason why, if this as written, a person were to come to us, we couldn't make the findings to say yes. That I have no problem with. My issue is just the exercise of making them come before us.
I get it. Yeah.
And so to me, that doesn't, I hear what you're saying, but I don't. But I'm very content to move on.
Well,
I don't know we're going to get there.
I think I want to walk back my hard line on this, or whatever I want to call it. Because I've just thought of more scenarios about, so I'm thinking okay, somebody's secondary home, they want to put a ramp in, it's non-conforming, they come before us and we say, no, maybe build it like this, and it turns into a larger construction project. And then as I think about that, it's then it becomes, I guess, that would then become more of a permanent fixture of the home, whereas the reasonable accommodation is theoretically temporary and does not run the route. And so I guess when that person sells the home or whatever happens, it's no longer in their possession. Theoretically, that accommodation goes away, which seems difficult to enforce, but I guess that's another topic. I guess I'm more on board with Aaron's point of view now, having thought about it more. I guess because my overall concern was that sort of people were just going to want to be building ramps all over the place, or sort of using this, if it's their secondary home, using this reasonable accommodation ordinance to, weasel something else out of the city that wouldn't normally be allowed.
So I wonder, one of the things I was starting to think is, well, what would be the different outcome? Going to me versus the planning commission. I guess I might be more worried about saying no than planning commission as a body. But I think I would understand what the alternatives were. And I could talk to Ross and some other people about what's reasonable. But I wonder, this idea of a loophole seems to be, and that's STRs, it could be second homes. And I wonder if maybe we need an extra finding, because I don't see that these findings would, it says that it's occupied. Well, someone might occupy their STR a few weeks of the year and, this is their lose, people get that. And maybe that's where this idea of will not impose an undue financial administrative burden or frustrate the application, whether maybe that's what that's getting at. But maybe we want, whether the requested accommodation will impede implementation of a required fundamental alteration in the program policy law. So does that impede implementation of it? So if someone, I'm thinking about parking because STRs and parking. So someone requests a reduced parking spot for an STR, and I go, well, that would kind of impede implementation of the STR ordinance. I suppose I could say that. But we could add another finding that it's what it would be, but it's not a loophole, or it's not a, I don't know. Well, I guess the findings really already get at that because it's necessary. It's necessary to make housing available to an individual.
It's tough because then that opens up the can of worms. Now are we limiting accessibility to vacation in our area? I don't know what kind of situation that, coastal commission, coastal act. I mean, they get upset when we paint the curbs a different color. What kind of level of detail do they? I don't know.
They haven't been super interested in housing in the past, but with the state priorities have changed, they're being pushed to, because really for them, housing residences was not a priority use. It's not a priority use under the coastal act. They would prefer vacation renters.
Are though, right?
Hmm?
The visitor services, and
Yeah.
I'm just thinking that priority through. If we do something, because I was thinking, well, we could put language in there excluding STRs. So that obviously, I don't think we go for that. And is that necessarily the right decision? Should we be limiting access if somebody wants to make an STR accessible?
You can get sued if it's not accessible and the bathroom isn't, for any.
Business is not for private residents. But would we be opening ourselves up to liability or frustration if we put a barrier in place to, I have an STR and I want to make it an accessible STR? What do you mean? No.
It seems like it.
Well, again, I think we talked about this the last time. That is that an STR is business. So there are some, to me, then the requirements change for, ADA compliant things, I believe. There should be.
They do change.
Well,
Bathrooms.
Do they? I mean, I don't know. The STR is not a business. It's kind of odd.
Yeah, they don't have a business license. They have the STR license a little bit within the city. And
Yeah, I don't
for
think
example, I have one down the street from me that's being turned into one, and I don't think they have to bring themselves up to any kind of ADA standards. So
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I guess that's a good point.
It is kind of an awkward thing.
Yeah. Let me propose this.
now I want them all to come to the planning commission because I don't want to make these decisions.
That's backfired big time.
Yeah.
Go to the lawyer.
Let me propose this. Let me make sure I understand. We do not have to get this recommendation to the city council right away. Is that
Absolutely not, yeah.
okay? So having said that, it may be worthwhile to have a little bit further discussion on this with a little bit more time to think about it. And so I would recommend or suggest that we take a look at the rest of it. There's probably some controversial things here, but then we come back next month and take a look at this again, and maybe we can, with a little bit more reflection and a little bit more detail, we can figure out what it really means and what we want to do. I think there's been some good ideas. Maybe they'll start to percolate up to the surface and we can come up with a fix this one way or the other. Fair enough.
Sounds good.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Excuse me, reasonable is a legal term. And whether or not the city attorney the city's not going to get sued for doing something that we consider reasonable.
Well, anybody can sue the city anytime they want. It's whether they win.
Yes.
Um,
So I think we should check to the city attorney to see if we
Okay.
create no problem. For them.
yeah, I think this is a good one. Ordinance in general to get some input from the city attorney. So in the meantime, before the next meeting, I could send this current version and highlight that particular issue. To use.
Technically, it'll probably be the February meeting because January is our joint meeting, right?
No, I
No,
thought we were
there's two
having.
meetings.
Oh, there's two. Okay, all right. So we still, okay,
Yeah, right.
we still have a regular meeting, all right.
Right, is that true?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, or because that's on
The fourth.
Tuesday, so. the
24th.
City council meeting, yeah, it's the second city council meeting date.
Okay, if we can skip over page, well,
Well, I thought on page 6, the decision was really well. I thought that was fine.
so yes, if there's any other comments on this reasonable accommodation ordinance, get them into the record. At this point. Hearing none, seeing none, okay. Okay, so we'll bring this back next month or at our next meeting, we put it that way. Okay, at this point, I'll open it up for public comment. Is there any comment from public on this agenda item? Hearing none, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission. Any further comments? Okay, good discussion. Still needs work. Okay, next item is the general plan update, community design element. Discussion decision on an updated draft of the community design element.
25 pages. Right, back. Front back. And
It's
what-
much thinner than last month, though.
Who's counting?
What?
It's much thinner than last month.
The last one is-
So let's see, so we are working on kind of integrating the design guidelines and the community design element is one of the things we talked about. So again, made the edits from the last meeting. There are several comments about making sure that everything's consistent. So I did incorporate things from the community design element that were not in the design standards yet. So I did move some things around or copied some things over. One of the things I was thinking with CD 1.3 is that to integrate them even further would be to actually have the guidelines of CD 1.3 follow those design standards. So this is just sort of a very brief example of what that might look like here in italics. So it goes through the same letters. That exercise also got me thinking about maybe combining some more sections, like all the ones on accessory structures, for example, because I didn't have much to say about some things. So that's one thing to think about in terms of the bigger picture. Signs were kind of the main one that still had some detailed guidelines. Some of those are actually, I realize, more of a regulatory nature. So I left them as policies that will direct the zoning or standards in the zoning ordinance, made them into their own policies. And then a few things I brought over to the design standards as well from the sign CD 4.4. And then the design guidelines just incorporated comments from the last meeting. One of the things that came up was how to sort of try these out and whether we could start using them before they're certified by the Coastal Commission in 10 years. So I had a couple of ideas. We could certainly do some mock hearings would be one way, and we could do projects that have come before Trinidad or projects that from somewhere else and like pop up somewhere in Trinidad. So we could do some mock hearings. But I also, another idea would be to use these standards to kind of refine the existing guidelines. So that's the last document in the packet of this topic. So I took the existing design criteria, those are in standard print, and then in italics, I copied the design standards under where they might fall, and they didn't all fall nicely, and a lot of them didn't really fall under one, but maybe they could all go under, I think H, because it's just doesn't fit with the character of the community, basically, is design review finding H. So most of we could probably squeeze them under there. So that's one idea, is to sort of adopt those as a policy. That sort of refines the existing guidelines. So you would still make your findings on a project based on the regulatory design guidelines that are in the ordinance, but you could use the standards to help refine those.
You're suggesting that for like a potential next project in front of us, kind of running in parallel?
Potentially, yeah. If the planning commission has adopted some policies to help interpret things, definition of a kitchen and a wet bar, for example, because that has come up. Deal with after the fact permits, things like that aren't really well defined in the ordinance. But to do an amendment is a lot of work. And so we do have some policies that help refine your decisions, but your findings would still have to be based on the regulatory. So that's just a couple of ideas to think about in terms of sort of testing. So otherwise, just continue reviewing with the community design element, design standards. The community design element will go to, into the general plan packet and get to the coastal commission. We'll talk more about sort of the logistics and process as part of the next item, I guess, if we get there. The design guidelines, I know the planning commission would be interested in processing that amendment to the zoning ordinance sooner rather than later. And so that will be, I actually have a meeting with coastal commission staff tomorrow to talk about ADUs and exemptions and exclusions. We are going to set up a regular monthly meeting time. So that would be a question, to their workload and whether we can get that processed sooner rather than later.
That's really.
I think it is important.
Well,
Design review is.
And then they say they don't have staff.
Supposedly they have more staff now, so hopefully they stick around.
And they're gonna fly this Friday, they're gonna do, or is it next? The ADUs.
Oh, the ADUs, the
STRs.
STRs is this Friday, yes.
Okay, so you'll be on.
I have another meeting. I will be watching my phone though, in case something comes up and I have to jump onto that meeting, but Eli and Jennifer will be there.
Okay.
Or in person.
So I'll be perfectly honest, I am totally confused. And part of it, I think, is nomenclature. I think and bear with me just so I can figure this out. So we have, the first document is the design element. I got that. But then we start talking about principles on page 3, and I'm just jumping in and then we can come back and take a look at more detail. But I'm trying to walk through this and make some sense of it. And so now we're talking principles, CD 1.
Well, I don't know that, I have a note there, I'm not sure that's. the
Yeah,
right word.
I did see that, yeah. So then I walk over to the ordinance, which is 17.60, right? Design review. And yet the ordinance contains standards and criteria. Design standards on page 3. And so I get confused when we switch from standards to criteria. I'm having a hard time trying to figure out then, and all of this at the top here says criteria and procedures. Then I go to the design guidelines and it says it's a sample supplemental design guideline, and then it says it's a design criteria. So I'm just real concerned about the way the nomenclature is being used. And I'm not sure what the end, if the end document is to be the design criteria, and it's labeled 17.6-040, but it's not 040. That's in the, I'm sorry. It is 040, excuse me. But we call it a design criteria, and yet we could say that they're guidelines.
But they're samples.
Well, okay, yeah, they're samples at this point, but the idea was to merge the two. And to me, it's very confusing.
So okay, so is it primarily the sample supplemental design guidelines that are confusing?
I understand where they come from,
Okay.
but it's the way in which they get mapped back into the other documents. And sometimes they show up as criteria, sometimes they show up as guidelines, sometimes they're guidelines or criteria or standards.
I think that is a good point. Maybe, I think right now they're called criteria. Maybe criteria is a better word. Basically, they're findings. Use them now as findings. You have to find that a project is consistent with these criteria. So we write them as findings.
Right.
And maybe standards in the new ordinances, maybe criteria is a better word. Because they're not really standards that have to be met. They're not a hard line standard. I think of standard as more of a hard line kind of thing. So maybe criteria is better.
And where is that?
Would be the new section 17.60 or 040, which would be consistent with the existing.
Okay, so what you've done here, though, is turn these into view protection findings. I mean, a design review and view protection findings, right?
In the sample one.
Yes.
So what this is our existing language.
Yes.
Yeah. And so this is only, I'm not trying to keep the old language. What I'm trying to do is give you a way to use the new language until we are able to officially adopt it. So the idea would be that these are the design criteria that you are stuck with as of this moment. But we have these new ones that we've been talking about that are better. And can we incorporate that into our decision-making before they're officially certified by the coast? So it's kind of it's really sort of a separate path. Where we're going is the first two documents. This is just a potential way to use those soon. But where we're going is the first two documents.
And it's simpler than the whole introduction, community design, all those sections.
The standards, yes.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of, the words a lot are the same, in this whole design element, but when you get to the sample design guidelines, you kind of made it easy.
Yeah, we kind of tried to mesh the two.
Yeah, but I mean, it's simple, it's not 18 pages. You know, and that's what we want. We want to understand, you know, the structures, the bulk, the landscaping, the native plants, you know. I thought it was great.
Well,
So
I hope that I'm the only one that's confused, so,
Well, you know, Richard, this is the element.
no, I completely understand. I understand the three documents.
Yeah,
But what I guess I get a little concerned with is it seems to me that we apply different words in different documents to one and the same thing.
mhm.
And we call them standards, criteria,
Priorities, policies.
and
programs.
it's, to me, it's very confusing. And certainly if it's confusing to, it's confusing to me. Oh, just say it.
Oh,
And Richard has brought this up for years. Because he finds the details and pinpoints them, and then Trevor has to explain it. You know,
And she
that, I
does a
mean,
good
he's
job.
so observant. Because he's been here so long, that he just knows, well, this is. Help.
I like how you said it, Trevor, like this is existing. And that could be spelled right across the top in big letters. And this is what we're moving towards. Spelled across with big letters.
But I mean, I do think that I think Richard has a point, and I do think the nomenclature does jump around a little bit. And I think we should probably settle on what it should be. And, you know, in the general plan, we're talking a little bit bigger picture. So, you know, I don't think principle is necessarily the right word, because we have principles sort of defined as something even higher level, actually. But maybe in the general plan, they're guidelines. And then when they get down to the zoning ordinance, it's narrower, and that's where criteria. I mean, criteria or standards. Like I said, I kind of like criteria actually, because
What's in the plan right now is a criteria.
in the zoning ordinance, it's criteria, yeah.
Okay, well then let's keep it.
That would be in the dictionary, right? Which we already looked at a while ago.
In the glossary for this. We have principle defined, and I'm not sure we have standards or criteria defined.
I can give you like, dictionary and come. Put up.
Okay, well, okay, so again, not to get bogged down in nomenclature, but
Or cake.
maybe there's.
Okay.
Yeah. But again, if there's a way in which we can, number one, streamline, or not streamline, but can make it consistent across the documents, I think that would help.
But I think, you know, another way to think about it is the zoning ordinance has to be consistent with the general plan.
Of course, right.
But you'll be using the zoning ordinance for your decision, not what's in the general plan.
Yes,
So what we're using the general plan for is to write the zoning ordinance.
right.
So, so that's why these are policies, and I think guidelines is probably better than principles here. So these can be guidelines.
What page is that, Trevor?
Page 3 of the design element. Something's weird with the wording there. I will work on that. And then I think I like criteria for design. Even set of standards.
And just so I'm following you, where's that? Where do you want to do that?
That would be on page 3. That's the section 17.60.040
Instead of standards.
instead of standards. Yeah.
Wait a minute, I'm in the wrong document.
so now we're back in design review or no?
Yeah, now I'm in the ordinance, like design review,
Okay.
criteria and procedures. So yeah, that's what it's called, criteria. So yes, it should be criteria.
Design criteria.
That's
Yes.
for okay.
Following design criteria. And then I will do a search and see if they come up elsewhere too.
Great, that I think would help. Okay, we kind of, again, I apologize for getting us off track, but let's go back.
So. Criteria.
Yeah, it's just one more clarifying question. So the sample, I just want to make sure I understand. The sample is an attempt to combine current on the book stuff with the stuff that hasn't been certified yet. It's kind of like cliff notes for us as commissioners to use down the road, right? That's what that in theory would be used for in lieu of the line item on page 3, section 7, 040, right? It would just.
Yeah, because that hasn't been officially adopted
Right.
yet. So, but if you wanted to adopt these as policies, so how do you determine the finding A, the alteration natural landforms caused by cutting, filling, grading shall be minimal, structure shall be designed with the site alteration into a common structure. Well, how do you make that finding? Well, you could use these criteria 1 through 6 to help you make that finding.
Technically, the ones in italics are not currently.
That's right.
Okay. Could it make sense to, in essence, table this kind of hybrid document, which I think would be a really great tool for us until we finish this one and then
Yes,
have
yes,
just
yes.
for
That might
clarity?
make
I don't
sense.
know.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Yeah, that's a good.
Because I think once we get the meat done, then it's like, okay, yeah, let's have
Then
the
you
kind of,
can get how to
yeah.
implement.
Because I really dig this tool. I think it'll be really neat for us to kind of test drive as we go forward.
And you can read it better.
Yeah.
Larger print. Well,
I don't know, just a thought. I
Yeah, no, very good.
don't know if we can do that.
The other thing I was also thinking, and again, just a thought. This is probably from the public's perspective, I'm thinking, from the public's perspective, probably one of the most important elements to look at. And I'm a little, not that I'm disparaging anybody who has participated in this process, but I'm a little concerned that we have not had as much public comment as we probably need.
I'll bring the gang in.
Well, good. I was wondering if maybe we made a little pitch to the city council, because they usually get a little bit better attendance. And we,
Put in the paper.
well, whatever we decide, but it seems to me that this is real critical, more so than some of the other elements that we've looked at. And I would really, really like to get more public comment.
Yeah, I think, a lot of the other elements, it's kind of standards that.
Yeah, land use.
Yeah.
You know,
And it's standard stuff where this really is
I mean,
the
this,
heart of the community.
Right.
So, I mean, an alternative, well, not just the city council, but we could, you could do flyers, you could do the email.
Yeah, could we email everybody saying, hey, this next month, this is what we're discussing. This is,
Good point.
I don't know.
Email newsletter, yeah.
good point. Yeah.
Can you post a survey online?
This is the city's website.
Well,
We
anyway,
are working on being able to do. Yes, we could.
But
Yeah,
all
for-
the other planning commissions, city councils, including our Trinidad city council, have their agendas in the time standard every week.
no, I understand that.
And then you just, put it so that it requests public attendance to, critical public attendance needed to help move our general plan along.
No, it's a good suggestion. We're having a joint meeting between the STR committee, the planning commission, and the city council to talk about STRs. In my mind, that would be a great thing to do for design review. But that's just a suggestion. Okay, I don't want to get, again, I apologize for getting bogged down in this. So,
Well, let's plan on trying to do maybe make an announcement at the city council meeting. We'll use the email newsletter. We'll ask Gabe to highlight the fact that this is on the agenda. You have any other ideas?
Refreshments will be served.
Well, that's a good way to get people into town.
Welcome to the PGA.
Carrot cake?
No, just cookie.
Uh,
I'll take all the boxes, I'll put them in Anton's office.
but we can start with that and try and you guys can get the word out too. And then if we don't get enough that way, then and we do, later do the joint planning commission city.
That's great. Maybe if you can ask, are you gonna ask Gabe, like, to kind of plain text the language a little bit, not we're discussing community design. Here's what this means to you. We're discussing the elements that are used by the planning commission to, determine a project's approvals, something. Use
He's
it,
good at that, he can.
Yeah,
work
absolutely.
that.
Sure.
I don't know.
It's really a PSA. But the other things that you get to
Oh, is
get
that-
the drafts on the website too.
Sure. Okay, any other questions or comments on staff report? Other than what we've already talked about? All of mine were what's a design standard criteria versus guidelines, so. Okay, so as is our process, for right now, we'll just start with the community design element and walk our way through it. So are there any questions, comments, or corrections or whatever on page 1? Boilerplate. Seeing none, moving to page 2. Anything on page 2?
I wrote on page 1 is the 1976 last paragraph, general plan. That was updated in 1978, certified by the Coastal Commission. So when we do a new one in 2030, a lot of what was in 76 will be changed.
Yes. Yes, almost everything.
Except for the years.
And I'm still supposed to map all 75 existing policies to the draft policies, and I don't, they're all lost. I don't.
Anything else on page 1? Page 2?
Okay, I have one on page 2 in background. Second paragraph, third sentence. The city has also adopted a views and vegetation ordinance that establishes a permit process to restore views that have been unreasonably blocked by growing vegetation. Okay, so somebody goes to wants to challenge a neighbor. Then they pay all kinds of fees to go over that.
So technically, yes, if someone wants their neighbor to cut vegetation and can't work out a solution directly with the neighbor, they can file an application with the city and they do have to pay a fee. The ordinance does talk about distribution of fees, and it's not all on the applicant, it's also partially on the vegetation.
But that's fairly straightforward, right from the views and vegetation ordinance, correct?
Yeah, I think it recommends that, at least for the work, I think it recommends a 50-50 split, but that the planning commission can determine something else.
And that would go on both pieces of property. A note on both pieces of property that this was discussed on this date and this was agreed upon. That the bushes, that is not going to be affected in 20 years.
So, yes, the ordinance does recommend something like a deed restriction. So there will be a maintenance agreement for if the vegetation isn't totally removed. Yeah, there's some sort of maintenance agreement. that is required as well.
Thank you.
Anything else on page 2? And here we are talking policies on page 3. And we've agreed that under CD 1.3, we're changing principles to guidelines, correct?
Yes, but I do want to bring you back to my staff report and whether we should have guidelines that follow the topics of the design criteria. And I had sort of an example of what that might look like in the staff report.
You're talking about the help me out, where are you looking?
On page 1 of the staff report in italics.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So just to help with that, Trevor, CD 1.3A, where is that in your example of the staff report? You know, I mean, you can just kind of map back the
Oh,
example
so-
or.
These ones that are in here would go away. The ones that are currently in,
On page 3, you would suggest removing and replacing with something similar to.
to this. Now, this is just sort of bare bones. It doesn't provide a lot, but it follows the design criteria of section 17.60040. It's the same topics.
So you could just have a, well, it'd be parallel.
So they kind of
which is
parallel,
nice, and
yeah.
then maybe a more simplified structure of that section. Flushed out.
The
Criteria.
Yeah, thanks for taking us back to your staff report, because on page 2, I didn't understand Q. It just says C or combine within, but I don't, what's Q?
So if you go to section 17.60.
So that's my problem. I always have to go back to something else there. All right.
So, and that's where, so I just did this really quick as an example of what it might look like. I didn't try and write detailed criteria, but for example, A is regarding cultural resources. So it is respect the city's cultural heritage. And then we have more detailed criteria for that. Exhibit good site plan for B. I mean, and most of these fit really well, but then I got into some like roofs. What, do I have to say something else about roofs? And then it made me start to think combining roofs with either D or E. And combining unenclosed spaces with something else. And then there are several that are kind of accessory structures.
Okay.
And I thought maybe combining, instead of a separate walls and fences section, that would just be great accessory structures. So this made me start thinking about combining more sections.
1.3 would become in essence kind of an outline,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And then. Okay.
I like that idea, and I like the parallelism, you will, and then how that sort of, like in my mind, comes down from the top of the pyramid.
I like it too. It's kind of tidy.
Much easier to follow if you were trying to read.
Any other questions, comments on the staff report?
So is there a consensus that I would amend CD 1.3 to be something more like what's in this? Yeah.
What's the consensus?
I'm in support of that. I mean, a lot of these, this specificity that's currently given in CD 1.3 is repeated
Yes.
in the design criteria. And I think we can simplify this to just be our guidelines as they are, and then have the more specific criteria down below.
Kind of consensus then that we go in
Yeah,
this
no, I like
direction?
that concept a lot.
Okay,
I don't know.
all right, sure.
And you maybe haven't thought about this enough yet, but how about combining some of those sections?
Yeah, I definitely thought roofs can go in, with. I mean,
Yeah, I think that's great. I think a lot of that would kind of come from your exercise of combining the things and creating the outline, so to speak. I don't want to,
Yeah,
you know, I think.
and same with.
Yeah, describing it in more places actually can confuse.
yeah, and the wording is a little different here and there, and we'll change, you know, we might pick on one and then it doesn't get changed in another, and so, yeah, I think that's part of why.
Any opportunity for that. Great.
Okay, good.
it.
Great.
And then any of these A through J that aren't really incorporated into the criteria, I will incorporate them into the criteria.
Going once, going twice. Anything else on the staff report?
I just said on the ad, preserve public and private views by sizable and obtrusiveness. Because we're doing that with structures. So maybe it should be landscape.
Say that again, Diane?
Well, and I'm gonna bring it up later on too. F, preserve public and private views by size, bulk, and obtrusiveness of vegetation.
You could just make it Diane ordinance,
I'll be here.
like with the views, when it comes to views.
He's a
just say,
bit-
put it in.
I can't, and we had Cheryl said before she left that we were going to do the city council and the planning commission tour, remember, of the city, and I was gonna point out the trees. I'm still ready.
Well, we still have it as a future agenda item for vegetation, or regulations, yes.
Get my wheelchair.
So you're still gonna have to attend meetings, Diane.
I would have been pretty close.
Okay,
Close to anybody except you.
all right. Ready to move on to the element itself?
I thought we were on page 4, or not?
No. I don't think so.
Going backwards. All right.
Well, you had a couple comments on the background on page 1 and 2, and I think we have those resolved, right? Okay, moving on to page 3, and we talked about principles is now guidelines.
And where was that?
Page 3 of the ordinance,
Oh, up here.
of the element, excuse me, of the element.
I'm gonna replace A through J with
With what? Oh, the front.
what's in the stack,
And then ensure that the detail of A through J somehow,
makes it into the criteria.
Right.
if I have just like a couple minor comments on A through J, is that helpful for you right now? Is it better to wait until it comes back or?
Yeah, and I know there was a comment about J.
Right.
I just want to clarify that. And I think it is in the design criteria as well, so maybe that's.
Yeah, I mean, I think I brought that up as it being repetitive, but. I mean, I think we want to emphasize that, so it's fine to leave it in there.
Okay. Anything else on page 3?
Again, just specifically under A, does it make more sense instead of surrounding the building, surrounding the development? Is that more inclusive? I don't know.
Sure.
And then C, I just had a question for the commission about limiting it to nearby roofs versus consistent with roof lines within the city as a whole. I don't know. You know, do we want to have, if you're not close to the bluff, can you have this type of roof line? If you're, I don't know, is that going to change the character of town?
What letter?
C, where it's in red, they're nearby roofs compatible. Roof lines are compatible with other nearby roofs, large ability. I wondered if compatible with other nearby roofs and are consistent with roof lines within the city, or just reference the city as a whole. Because I feel like the roof lines within the city are fairly uniform.
I think we talked about this maybe
Okay.
last time.
Yeah.
And. Well, some people have flat roofs and some people have pitched roofs. Right? I mean, I guess And it's, one side of the street, they're,
Right.
or,
I guess my specific example is the Vanderpool project, right? The concern there was it dramatically affected views and like that kind of stuff. Would that be okay? Would we be okay with that being elsewhere in the city?
Across the street.
It was just, I don't know, that's why I kind of
With the
thought of that,
school
but
behind it.
it's something to
yeah.
think about and ponder, right?
Then it would become.
Because it does impact the town character.
I think I
Different
remember
roads.
some comments that, if on scenic drive, it'd be fine.
Yeah,
In fact, I think this originally said that compatible with the,
neighborhood.
no,
Along the street.
Yeah, along the streets.
There was something about, we opened it up a little bit because we didn't want just the neighbor, the next door neighbor
Yeah.
to worry about the roof. So that's why we said nearby roofs. Maybe that's still not the right.
I don't know, is that still a little too narrow? I don't know.
Well, you cross down along the street. And along the street.
Yeah, I think we changed it to nearby because there was a thought of what about a roof that's not on the same street, but next
Yes.
block over. We
Right.
wanted to be more vague sort of purpose, I guess.
What about, in this part of town, there aren't very many second stories.
Exactly.
Is that going to, so if your neighbors are all one story, does this mean you can't have a second story?
I don't think it means that. It just has to be compatible.
Just something to think about, yeah.
But it does raise a bigger, interesting question that there is different character throughout the city. Kind of the traditional right here city versus, and what's appropriate here might be inappropriate.
Well, and I think that's why we were trying to say, or why we use the word nearby. Because at one time we tried to define neighborhoods
Right.
and we didn't get very far with
I
that.
wouldn't think.
But but you could, I mean,
Yeah.
the architecture in the neighborhood on scenic for an example versus ocean is
Right.
totally different.
For sure.
So, what's the pleasure of the commission? Nearby, something else?
I like nearby.
Yeah, fine.
We can leave it there for now. We can circle back if absolutely necessary. Anything else on page 3? Page 4. I'll bring it up again, and I honestly don't remember the explanation that you gave us, but under CD 2.4, retain unobstructed coastal views from Edwards and Van Wyck. And I thought about Wagner. But then also I was thinking about, and I'm drawing a blank on what is the street that Chiwi's house is on? What's the name of that street?
Pacific.
Pacific.
Well, his is on Ewing, but the
Ewing.
Pacific is.
Down below.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking about too. And so there are other places in town other than just Edwards and Van Wyck.
And Wagner.
I guess the question would be, are there really actually unobstructed coastal views if you walk down Wagner? If you walk down the trail,
Trail, yeah.
right? But from the street itself versus Edwards and Van Wyck, I feel like are kind of a little different. Is that why we have that in there? If that makes sense. I mean, Wagner, they're obstructed by buildings. I can't see, there are no unobstructed views from the roadway there from the trail.
Why not?
But from the
trails?
streets. If you're on one.
Oh, and trails, yeah.
You could expand, why is it Edwards? Well, okay, I know why it is. This is actually similar to an existing general fund. So this one actually, this is similar to an existing general plan. It has
Yeah,
evolved.
I
over
think that
time.
was, I think that was your retort to us. But I just started thinking about other places in town where
Yeah,
um,
I think part of the idea was that those are publicly, well, no, they weren't even publicly owned when the general plan was done.
But the
Those
trail,
bluffs. Yeah, but I don't see why it's Edwards and Van Wyck and not, the wagon road trail.
and there is a trail right there on you.
Yeah, and State Park Trail, yeah.
but you can't see it because the vegetation's so high now.
But
Well, it could say retain unobstructed coastal views from streets and trails to the extent possible.
Yeah, that'll, yeah.
that is, that's great.
Yeah, that's gonna be the biggest change in 30 years in this town. Is that usually everybody builds in and blocks all the views, so it's just a big wall that we're going down all the streets. So if we could avoid that, that sounds
You-
great.
Vegetation maintenance.
Vegetation and
I'm
Diane.
gonna be hired, I'm gonna get my own job.
Anything else on page 4?
Yes, okay, so CD 2.511. So that's where you start to talk about the vegetation management plan. So instead, it's vegetation maintenance shall be consistent with projections for slope stability. And cultural resources and residential use.
Well, I think so that is a program under CD 2.5 and 2.5 is landscaping and vegetation shall be maintained such that it does not cause unreasonable view obstruction. And then CD 2.5.1 is also that will become consistent with slope stability.
And then CD 2.6, preserve and enhance new corridors by undergrounding or screening new or relocated electrical and communication and distribution lines for underground utility service connection for new development where feasible. So we've batted this around for years, it's too much money to make people go underground, and they did the cable lines out here, on Main Street out there, but not electrical.
But it's for new development, so generally for like a new house will require them to underground from the pole, for example. Unless it's not feasible. So that if the city does ever come through an underground, it's.
My only comment with CD 2.6 is that it says where feasible, and I thought somewhere else we said that it was a requirement.
Well, in the design standard, it's where feasible. And you said make them consistent, so I put the where feasible in this one. Because it's expensive.
In the city, we tried.
Well, we're talking two different things. The public utilities, yes, that's very expensive. And I vaguely remember that there was a program where we were actually banking credit with PG&E. And when we finally built up to some tens of thousands of dollars, then they did a lot of undergrounding. But I think what we're talking about here is, Trevor pointed out, new development. This is where potentially someone needs to bring a line in from the street to their house or to the development, put it that way. And it's got to be underground where feasible. I just think that it's too bad that we have to say that, but because cost will always be a factor.
I mean, yeah. And that. So that's a current standard.
If we remove that and then somebody felt that for their project, it wasn't feasible, they could come before us and say, hey, we can't do it because of this. Oh, okay, and then we can issue a variance, right?
Yeah, where is that from?
That we can do.
Okay, it's a should. So the current criteria is, and it's a design review finding. New development should include underground utility service connections. When above ground facilities are the only alternative, they should follow the least visible route, well designed, simple and unobtrusive.
So what page is that? You're on?
It's on page 2 of the sample supplement,
Okay.
which we're not supposed to be talking about, but, so I'm just reading the existing criteria.
It's really good.
So it's currently sort of a should, it's not a.
Anything else on page 4? Page 5? Your note here is, should this be under signs or views? It overlaps with 1.3G. And I have to go back. We resolve that?
Well, I guess I ended up moving that to views.
Yeah.
Oh, you took it out and then moved it. Okay, all right. Thank you.
I should take out the comment, but I might have just done that on my own without the planning commission. So I still wanted to make sure.
I feel like people seem to have a lot of opinions about signs, just with the one example that so I think it's important to maybe state it again.
Emphasize it.
I
Okay,
think there's a lot of opportunity for
So
the need for
potentially
signs in town either.
in both places.
Where's the new other place? Can you help me?
It's not under view policies.
Well, it's
Maybe I took it out because it was repetitive with force for some of what was in 4.4.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess my comment was I didn't see how this related to G is my point. 1.3G.
Well,
1.3G.
1.3G probably got amended. Yeah, so no, it does not.
Yeah, signs are important, and the more definition, criteria, standards, the better off we are. I guess my comment was it didn't relate in my mind to G.
No.
Okay, that's what my question was, yeah. Anything else on 4? Excuse me, 5. Okay, moving on to 6. You asked a question here, comment TP7. Should we include anything about temporary signs, that is flags and sandwich boards? And my comment was, yes, absolutely, we should talk about them and include banners. Because we had, I'm going back to the proposal, well, actually the request for putting up banners on the light poles.
Hmm.
We
And
did design review.
yeah. So, yeah, excuse me. So
And we said,
we said yes.
No, the crabbing and stuff.
I guess my thought is that, yes, we need to include
Okay.
all of those.
So do they get permits for the signs?
We approved it. I don't think it required a permit.
Yeah, I don't think it was a permit. I think it was design review.
Right.
That we did for it.
Right.
There are some provisions for temporary signs, it's quite like 15 days in any calendar year, or something, I think.
Yeah.
You know, the flags that people put up have come up, the sandwich boards, the signs on vehicles. That's probably really not allowed technically. So yeah, I think it would be good to address those, and that's really more of a regulatory issue. So that'll be a standard in the zoning ordinance about what kind of temporary signs. But to have a policy that sets that, guides that, was good. Or just, limit the number of those kind of things, or keep it for community events or that.
What about a business that puts them out in front during their operating period?
That's a good question.
I mean, we have some that do that, right?
They do.
Food of the day, that kind of stuff.
And I think
that's-
that under the current rules, that's probably not allowed.
They've been up forever.
Do you guys want to allow? those kind
Well, I think we need to see some examples of how we can regulate them. Definitely.
But I'll put a policy in here that they should be rated.
Anything else on page 6?
I just had a question about CD 5.2. I feel like I remember us having some kind of discussion about including a line that gets it minimizing light pollution from interior lighting as well. So you don't create a light box, that kind of stuff. And I didn't feel like that was captured here.
Yeah, I wondered about putting that, like CD 5.1. I think what we did in the standards or criteria now is we just took out the word exterior. I think is probably what we did.
That sounds familiar. Yeah.
So maybe we should do the same thing with. Yeah, all lighting visible from offsite shall be minimized to viewed. And I think, night lighting could apply to either.
Mhm.
Oh, but all lighting, yeah, it can be just all lighting, we can take out exterior.
Anything else on 6? Moving on to 7.
See, 6.1. New development shall be required to utilize native and drought tolerant landscaping with drip irrigation or other water conserving irrigation system. So who checks this? Ross?
That is a good question, and that's maybe a little bit on the regulatory language. Might look at that. That's a good question. And we don't have a good system for that, but there is a state law in place that if you are putting in 500 square feet or more of new landscaping or rehabilitating 2,500 square feet or more of landscaping, you have to follow the state water efficient landscape ordinance. Now, I'm starting to work on one for Trinidad that's a little bit simplified. I think the state ordinance is longer than the city's entire zoning ordinance. It's very complicated, and it requires a whole water budget and soil testing. I mean, it's onerous. But there are people in Trinidad who use crazy amounts of water on their landscaping that probably should not be in a coastal sandy environment. But we don't have a good system in place to permit or track that. So it is currently I'd say it's a gap.
So that's your WELO.
Yes.
Future, okay, all right. Anything else on 7?
Just 6.3, CD 6.3. Just that we probably need a mechanism to track and enforce that so that if somebody has a plant when they first opened up their business and then, you know, I mean, I've seen landscaping going in at some of the businesses in town and I don't know.
Yeah, and I would say we don't have a system in place now to track that.
But I'll be hired on it. You can hear them.
You can't afford you, Diane.
Kate, Jocko,
No, not Ramones.
Father, homemade.
It's just an observation that's,
Yeah.
it's there, but the mechanism to enforce it or at least
Yeah,
track
that would be more.
it. Tracking would be the first step and then
That would be something we would include in the zoning ordinance, so that's a little bit more regulatory. Than what.
I mean,
what-
and-
it's not a whole lot of places in town either. It's just finding the time, right?
Well, the ambassadors are coming here. You're about that? We'll see what happens.
Okay,
That does, that's a good point. You know, and this says that require landscaping and replace unhealthy or dead landscaping consistent with what was required as part of the development permit. So if they decided that they wanted to change their landscaping completely, they have to come back for a new design review. Is that correct?
yeah, I mean. Has the city ever required landscape? I mean, we talked about.
We're going to in the general plan.
Yeah, I mean, most cities do, you know, like a parking lot has to have a certain percentage of landscaping, a tree for every how many spaces. So most places do have landscaping requirements. Trinidad doesn't really accept it, talks about screening. Maybe in the parking, there might be something in the parking section about potential.
I was thinking of the monument sign at the Standard Station. And you know, they tore out all of the existing landscaping. I don't know, I shouldn't say tore out.
No, they maintain it.
They cut it back, but there was a plan when we approved that monument sign. I think it included landscaping.
Yeah,
So
I
they would
can
have to
look at
come
that, I can look at that.
that's the exact one I was thinking.
Now that, though, they have to maintain that because their sign has to be legally visible.
It is. It is. There's no
So
landscape.
they have to.
Rocks and a couple of plants.
But yeah, now I will look at Chevron as an example.
Chevron, but I say standard. Okay,
I knew what you meant.
I like Chevron.
I was with you.
okay. Anything else on page 7? Page 8. Okay. I don't, yes, so,
Just, I'm sorry, I apologize. A brief question on page 8. I feel like elsewhere we've brought the Curai site and other things like that to the front of sections of documents to highlight the importance. I don't know if we wanted to be consistent with that and do that here as well. That makes
And do you
sense.
want to make that 7.1 or do you want that more towards the whole beginning? I mean,
Well,
That's kind of the question. I feel like we've
it was,
done that, right?
We have.
now under CD 1.3, it will be A.
yeah, it's already up there. It's the first one. Anything else on page 8?
Redundant to have it then, or do we need to keep it as a CD7 then?
That's, yeah, is that exactly what Sam stated? Yeah, yeah, probably it does not need to be in the criteria and
So maybe, so we're moving it from CD7.
yes,
And where are you moving it to?
it's already in the design criteria.
1.3A.
And 1.3A.
Okay, I just wanted to make, okay, yeah, so we're still part of the same agenda item. All right, I'll move through the design review. And okay, so we'll plow right through this. This is chapter 17.60 design review. Any comments, questions on page 1?
5E. To approve and augment the regulations now included in ordinances related to planning, building, landscaping, and health in order to promote development, which is in the best interest to the public health, safety, and welfare of the city. So I want to add landscape.
Could add grading too, who's grading requires.
After planning and building.
Okay. Acceptable then?
Regarding your comments, Trevor, TP1, I feel like that line item isn't really necessary. I mean, this applies everywhere already, right?
Yeah, it's just, it's in the existing chapter. I think that's maybe a question for the attorney if
Okay.
that needs to be in there. Some of these are notes like, you know, just for ourselves, and like this one about those section references because they don't exist. So I'm gonna leave that one into the public review one so the public knows.
Are you talking about TP2?
3.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then under TP2, I didn't know, is there a way to reference where this list will be so that we don't have to continually update here and there and back and forth and make it kind of more evergreen? It's like, which, all new exterior alterations, construction
Not
as described in blah, blah, blah.
Not necessarily. Because I think design review is pretty specific as to what you want to review for design reviews. It's not necessarily every permit or permits that are applicable. You know, it's not going to be all coastal permits. It's not going to be, so it might be its own list. But it's something to think about for the future.
Or designated by an asterisk as found on this, just, I don't know, that way you're keeping one list in one location.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, page 2. No problem with storage goals, right?
Thank you for putting that in there. No, I think that's important to
Yeah,
have it in there. Thank you.
I guess my understanding when we talk about story poles is that we would only request story poles should we think that it was going to be affecting views or something like that. But this is sort of written like anything that came for design review would have to have story poles.
yeah, I think, so that's what I recall, because that's what I've done previously, is I've sort of been like, well, this could affect views, so you should put up story poles. But there's been a couple of projects where the planning commission was like, no, we just want story poles.
Like it.
But and then there is an exception. Yeah. Paragraph G.
Right.
So, I mean, we've got it covered there, I think.
And it's, you know,
just have to make a request.
footprint, bulk, or elevation. To really exterior changes.
So in the administrative design review approval, is that you?
Yes,
It's not Gabe, it's not Anton, it's not Ross, it's not Eli, it's you.
at this point, it's something. That's not. And that's still up, that definition can change. But yes, there's usually most cities have a zoning administrator or planning director that makes decisions.
So a couple of comments. One is on TP5. You make a statement here that this would be Sunday, the week before the hearing. And yeah, as we are configured right now, But that could change in the future if, people's schedules change. So if the meeting was on a different day, then it wouldn't be Sunday. It could be on a different day.
True, I was just putting that in there for context.
Oh, okay.
Is 10 days the right number?
Oh, I see.
I send out notices 2 weeks in advance. So maybe it should be closer to the 2-week notice. That was just really my comment is 10 days work.
And then the other comments, TP 6 and 7. I kind of think that with respect to TP 6, my opinion is that it doesn't have to be submitted for approval. Oftentimes we can tell from plans and from photos if it's representative. I don't know that we need to have a plan submitted for approval. That just seems to be a little more extraneous than it needs to be.
It does. I saw some places that required that, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, and then on TP 7, the idea or the issue of installation certified by a licensed professional. Same comment. I think that's, in my opinion, a little overkill, but I do like the idea that there is some sort of guarantee from the applicant or representative that they are representative of the new design.
So the affidavit option.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's where I want to be.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I side with Richard there, especially the licensed professional installation. I mean, who holds such a licensure anyways, but.
Well, it usually be the architect.
Benchmark.
The architect.
New business opportunity.
But I feel like, I mean, thinking of the story poles at the Vanderpool's house. I mean, yeah, they weren't perfect, but I think we all got the idea of what was going on there, and they did it themselves. I think that's great.
I don't know, if I agree totally with these comments. I think it might be helpful if we can find maybe in somebody else's ordinance, an example schematic of what we would like a story pole to look like. So that way, if I am doing it by myself, then, hey, this is kind of, we want it to look like this. Because I think some of the ordinances I looked at had those, and I think it would be helpful, like, hey, if it does this, then
Yeah,
have at it.
that. It's good, just to have some guidelines.
So you don't think we cover that on C?
I don't.
It's not in the building code, Trevor?
No.
I guess we might, I guess my thought on that is during Vanderpool, the most recent, the only one I've seen story poles come before me. It was not clear, it required some clarification. What is that showing the final footprint, kind of some of the stuff? Is it the roof line? Is it, because there was the overhang? And so I think if we show that we wanted to see the maximum overhang,
Okay, good point. Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
There are several story poles for that.
Yeah, I just had it. That was the only example I've.
The
That
crack
part.
house had one for the fence and the one on Underwood. It's doing the kitchen and I don't know what else they're doing below. It's a lot different than what. Joe Rotline, SDR. Across from J. Cruz. They had a story pole. At one point.
Well, that was just because I think for the projection of the kitchen.
Yeah.
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 Otherwise, everything else I think was interior on that one.
Yeah, go down to the bottom of the hill, look up.
I think if you just hit the high points and the angles, going across. I mean, the lighthouse was a prime example, not having a story pole. Nobody knew what was happening. Other people were going to the beach every day, didn't know what was happening.
Yeah, it's a good way to advertise.
I just had a kind of a question under the new section 1760.030. And then the next section is the same number.
Oh, okay.
And that's kind of think that was, no, that's the only place, I guess.
Well, I have two section ones too right now. That might be good.
So,
Are we on page 2, Richard?
page 2, yes.
To fix the number.
Anything else? Page 3, anything on page 3? Page 4.
I apologize, page 3, A1, just a question. Do we need to have something that covers modifications to existing parcels, or is that, would that be considered new development?
That is considered.
Okay, all right.
Okay, page 4. Page 5.
I think just going back to that, I could take out name, development shall respect.
Just development.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be new.
Right.
You're on page 4, where you crossed it out?
3.
3.
Well, you crossed out left.
But we just moved it over to the top. 5, anything on 5? And obviously, the big question there will be consultation with the Coastal Commission on private use.
I'll be the main person. Tom.
I'm not gonna let you in that meeting. Diane.
What?
We're not gonna let you in that meeting.
Yeah, I'm bringing goodies. I'm gonna prove.
Leave that door.
Page 6.
Put a trap into your car.
Okay.
Just had a question under
GPS.
G1B. Regarding privacy, and maybe this is captured elsewhere, but rooftop decks or structural projections, lookouts and similar. Capturing anything other, because a deck can affect privacy, but so could something else. Again, thinking of a crow's nest kind of.
Which letter? Aaron?
G1B.
Okay.
Anything else on 6? Page 7.
Question about L4. I don't know
Yeah.
why neon and digital jumped out at me in this new language. Is that, I mean.
Cause let's see, well, I copied that from.
I guess kind of, do we need to spell that out, that they're acceptable?
Well, neon and digital signs with distinctive designs or that provide important public information are accepted.
Right.
So yeah, I took that from CD 4.4. That's where it was.
Did we add that because of the sign at the school? That brings it down.
Yeah, well,
We added
and
that in, that those are eligible
neon
through.
and digital signs, I thought
Yeah, I had that same thought.
we said no digital.
Right, that's,
Signs.
Yeah.
Okay,
but then I think about an open sign in a business. Those types of things that we already have in businesses in town.
yeah.
They were here.
That might I wonder, is that even in the existing credit? It might even be in the existing. Although I think there's something about neon signs, I think in the existing general plans, probably where it comes from, and maybe because when this was written in the 70s, neon was the big new thing, like digital isn't now. So that's.
And I mean, there's a workaround. If we say no to neon, there's now LED strips that look just like neon. I have one on my front window.
Yeah.
I had one on Halloween. I have one now.
The bill sign in the front window?
No, it's the, the Grinch taking the ornament.
Oh, okay, the
Yeah.
bill sign.
No,
Just kidding. I don't see her development down there.
Do we have a resolution here?
no, it just jumped out at me for some reason.
Why don't we just eliminate the second part? And just ensure that lighted signs are designed to minimize glare and put minimum amount of illumination necessary to make the sign.
But
I know I'm off subject, but did we ever get the operating manual for the school sign? And also, by the way, they've been using multiple colors.
And the tree's not green yet.
Okay, so there you go.
And I thought they were gonna come back in.
did we prohibit multiple colors?
Yes.
But it's
think
not
we limited-
flashing and
No, it's not. And it's a very, it's,
informative.
Well, it was supposed to come back to you in 6 months.
Yeah.
Some sort of
Yeah.
review.
We definitely, yeah,
It's past.
that popped into my head the other day too, but that's fine.
okay.
I will.
Anything else on page 7? Page 8. Page 9. Under review procedure, about 2/3 of the way down, where view consideration are involved, the applicant is encouraged to contact property owners within 100 feet. And that could be affected and show them the layout. I think 100 feet is way too small. I think it should be more like 300. 200. I just think 100 is a little. Not enough.
I have that whole thing in the room myself. Same thing you did.
Who do you send notices to? Yeah.
Right now, it's only 100 feet, but it's 100 feet from the edge of the properties and not the building, but that's often just one or two properties deep.
And I do get a little concerned with, for example, on Van Wyck, when you are doing something on Van Wyck, and 100 feet only puts about halfway up into the properties on Edwards. So, you know, and everyone up there is affected. And I'm using it just as a raw example, but there's other places that are probably even more. I think 100 feet is just too short.
I agree.
I mean, I think it's fine to bump it up. It's just an
Yeah.
encouragement. So we want to put 300 feet there.
Did we have discussion on encourage versus shall? Can't remember.
Should and shall.
Right now they're encouraged, but where there's
Oh.
view considerations, they shall. Or
Is encouraged.
can't remember. Did we have discussion about that? I feel like we did, but I can't remember for the life of
I
me.
think we did. Maybe we
So
decided
what's the
to leave
word?
it as a shall or a should.
Well, maybe that's why we left it at 100 too.
I mean, I think the thing with shall is then you have to sort of like prove that, right? To
Yeah.
get your application, then your neighbors have
And
to
you get
sign.
into
something.
arguments and what if you don't get along with, yeah.
I think it's just,
They'll get
I
noticed
mean,
anyway
simply,
by the
we
city.
want people to be neighborly, of course.
So 200, 300?
Well, 300 for the planning commission if there's something. that we
For
can
financial,
I understand.
yeah, conflicts.
So maybe it should just stay 300. Sure. What do you think, Richard?
Encouraged to look within at 300. That makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a shall, but I think it sends that it makes sense to talk to your neighbors. And I agree. We want to be neighborly.
And then is it City Hall and the applicant will notice the neighbors?
No, it's,
Just the neighbor? Because normally they just in the community here. They want City Hall. They're not-
well, so this is encouraging the neighbors before they even submit an application to talk. In terms of the official noticing, we do it as a city.
What's the distance on that?
It's only 100 feet for design review and coastal development permits. Which we can up that when we do the.
I don't know, I'm just wondering, why wouldn't we want them to match?
Well, that's exactly what I think we should.
Yeah,
And what Trevor's saying, that when we get to that point, we should change that too.
And I think it's written right now that the applicant will provide the stamped envelopes with everybody address. But they always just come to the city to ask for everybody's address, so we just skip the middleman. Do it. The weird thing in Trinidad, and that's another kind of an aside, another conversation kind of with the coastal commission is Coastal Act requires notification of occupants as well as property owners. But how, without street addresses, I mean, without street delivery. In most places, you just do occupant at the address, and we don't have that option. So how do we, are people really required to go knock on people's? I don't think that's reasonable to require people to go door to door with notices. We notify people when we have their PO box water bills. But yeah, we don't do that one, and that'll be a conversation, because it's in the coastal regulations. I don't know how we're gonna deal with that.
well, story polls will help because they'll see them, right?
And everybody will see it, and notices are supposed to be posted on site too.
Yeah.
Do these notices get posted at the post office too, outside the door?
Yes, so
Stuff as
we
well. I know
do, so we do town hall, the post office, and Murphy's.
They're crowd. Murphy's and the post office. Notice.
Anything else on page, not? Okay, we are still working on the second agenda item, and this leads us or brings us to the guidelines, the draft guidelines. And
We're gonna ignore this for now.
yeah, and that's just what I was going to say. So we're ignoring that. So that is the end of this agenda item. And I'll open it up for public comment. So if anyone has any comments from the public on this agenda item. Hearing none, seeing none.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I do have a couple quick comments, if I may.
Sure.
The first one was with regard to the story polls and the proposed timeline. It did seem, based on our recent experience, that timeline was pretty short. So I think I would lobby for something longer than 10 days before the meeting would seem appropriate to me. It also seems a little bit strange to me that they're required to stay up for 15 days following the meeting, which is, of course, more time following the meeting than before the meeting. I also just wanted to mention on those draft review guidelines on page 6. I'm trying to scroll through and find it. H2. Oh, geez, I'm not gonna be able to find it in time. I just wanted to mention that I guess I was curious whether solar panels, which are placed on roofs, are considered to be roof treatments, because they are, of course, reflective to a significant extent. And if so, is that compatible with CD 7.2? I've got some additional thoughts about lighting, but nothing particularly time sensitive. So I'll shut up for a moment.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, good comments about story polls. And I think I captured the solar panel issue. And we're gonna look at
Is that in the CD element or the design?
I think it's CD7.
It was in the design review, page 6.
Yeah, design review page 6, H2. Brightly colored and reflective roof treatments should be avoided where they can cause glare and or detract from the natural surroundings. And I would just say that solar panels, by their very nature, do cause some amount of glare, which might be incompatible with CD 7.2.
Do we have much input, Trevor, from the state of California with restrictions on solar panels?
No. Yeah, there is a Solar Rights Act in California, and we can't make solar panels unduly burdensome, is kind of how that's written. So yeah, maybe we should mention solar panel.
Any other public comment? But you're sticking with us, Chris.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is enthralling.
Moving on to agenda item 3. 2023 planning priorities, discussion of upcoming projects and priorities for 2023. And
I'm gonna just.
we're taking a 2-minute break? Yes, we are.
Okay, good.
I'm not gonna be here in 44.
This is her last day.
All right, so we still have a quorum, I guess we can still move on.
Carry on.
Okay. Trevor?
Yeah, so this came from, the council's interested in keeping the general plan moving along, so, this started with a conversation with Cheryl and also Richard, about how to keep that process moving. And, as I mentioned in here, there's not a whole lot left I can do on the general plan. It's gonna be waiting for things outside of my control, and other city controls, grant projects, coastal commission grants, things like that. But it also got me thinking about, well, we have got a lot going on. There's a lot of priorities. So, and I did something like this a couple of years ago. I think it's sort of helpful for everybody to keep in mind and think about. And as we were going through here, I realized I even left one off. We have another. We have a REAP grant we're about to get the agreement for. So REAP is LEAP, but regional instead of local. And so it's through HCOG, Humboldt County Association of Governments, and but that goes through 2024. So we have a little bit of next one. I do need to add that to this list. So yeah, I just so in terms of deadlines, the SB2 and the LEAP tasks have the shortest time frames. We have to finish those by August of next year. I think that we can meet the grant requirements, whether we're not necessarily going to get through the entire tasks in that time, particularly with Coastal Commission delays. SB2, there's plenty of funding. LEAP, we might run out of some of the funding for some of these. But so, yeah, so I just listed with SB2, currently working on the parking study, done the counts. And so I'm starting to put the data and some figures together in a report. ADU ordinance, we can just get comments. Coastal Commission, I'm meeting with them tomorrow. ADU ordinance, and along with that, also the exemptions and exceptions, because that really goes with the ADU ordinance because of the septic upgrades. So to be able to do an administrative or ministerial permit for ADU, you have to be able to the septic grades as well. So they're related. Residential design standards is the exemptions and exclusions at this point. LEAP grant tasks were done. Planning Commission's done with the zoning ordinance update. We're working on reasonable accommodation, housing outreach. Jennifer is hoping to get some time soon to help me with that. And then the water conservation. So that's incorporating the state water efficient landscaping ordinance, as well as kind of looking at tracking water use over time, because change in the intensity of use of water is development under the Coastal Act. Incorporating water use into our permit reviews. I think, moving in the direction of every water customer having some sort of contract with the city. In a lot of places you do have some sort of agreement, but in Trinidad it predates so much of that, and that it might have sort of a reasonable range of use. And if you go beyond that, so sort of define that.
The other cities are fine.
Yeah. So kind of keep, since the city has a limited amount of water, and it should be spread around there. And then we've got the OPC grant. We're working on the first meeting. If they've got the website updated for that, if anybody's interested. It was actually a really great meeting last Monday.
Was it here or was it Zoom?
It was Zoom.
Okay.
So
how many people?
There's 17 that were not city or not, involved as part of the grant team. But a lot of great comments. And a nice range of comments.
It just needs to be publicized earlier or noticed earlier, because I mean, I didn't really find out until almost the day of.
We're looking at some additional ways to advertise for the next meeting, and there is going to be a survey online. If you want to, you can, I think they'll put the video up so you can watch the presentation and then answer a survey if you want. And then that'll go into the safety element of the general plan. Development applications, obviously, we have to process those as they come in. And there's a couple other grants, water and transportation grants, GHD's working on. I have a simple renewal. So I have to keep up with that. And then just miscellaneous planning. So those are kind of the first, those are always my first priority at this point. And then the second tier priorities, the general plan update. We're just talking 2023 isn't necessarily the priority, other than the safety element, OPC. And responding to Coastal Commission comments. There's not a whole lot else we can do on it at the moment.
Are they really open to the Coastal Commission meeting with you once a month?
Yes, they're doing it with the city of Eureka because we have a grant from them, and they've been
Well, to support us, so we need to get it.
So we do have that LCD update grant. We'll kind of bring all this stuff together. We are getting the OWTS program implemented citywide in 2023. That's kind of exciting. That's adopted that organization. And then the LCP update grant. I'm gonna do another round of sending out notices regarding the cultural elements. I'm trying to do that this week, and then the design guidelines, seeing if we can get these guidelines through the Coastal Commission is another on our list, the second tier priority at this point. So basically just a list of projects. I kind of tiered them first and second tier, basically on what has deadlines, and give them a comment. Otherwise, this is what our next year is going to look like. There's a lot going on.
There is.
And I'll just keep this on my bulletin board and make sure. That's a word.
Yeah, you should.
Any comments, questions,
They're good.
clarifications?
It's a good. You did this last year too. You made it.
It was actually 2 years ago. Yeah.
Because I still have.
And there's a few things still on the list.
So just by way of background, the genesis of this was Chuck Kelly, who is now Mayor Kelly.
Mayor now.
Yes. Asked the question, and I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, I don't think, but asked the question when we were going to be done with the general plan update. And Trevor gave her a number.
Which was,
End of 2025.
End of 2025. It's in
According to
this
the
report.
LCP grant.
It's,
Although actually I looked at the timeline and the general plan task, I think is supposed to be done at the end of 2024. And then 2025 is the ordinances.
so when we picked her up off the ground, she was very animated about trying to give us the right resources and the right priorities to try to get it done. And I think this goes to demonstrating that it's not a clear path. And so that was discussed briefly last night, as you know, we talked about this, or somebody did. And in any event, the point being, I guess I'm trying to get to is that next month, I think we do need to present this. I think the city council is expecting some sort of report. And so,
give them one of these priorities.
well,
So it's, and that's what I did last time, basically, just give them.
yeah, and my recommendation would be pass it on to Mayor Kelly now
Yeah,
and ask her if there's any, what she would like to see. You know, that's what I'm saying. The other thing that I think might help me a little bit is for each of the grants, and I don't know, maybe it's already online or something, but it would sure be nice to define each task, because you talk in several places, task 1, task 2, task 3, but I don't know what they are. And it would help me, I think, understand when we're talking about task 1, what that is.
Okay. Yeah, that's, I thought about, after I wrote it, I realized, so basically, under SB2, parking study is task 1, ADUs are task 2.
Okay, so this is 1. Okay. 2.
So like, I thought there was a 4th task, but at residential design standards would be task 3. Well, there's a 4th. And then same with LEAP, so the zoning ordinance update. That was task 1, reasonable accommodation, task 2, housing outreach, task 3, water conservation, task 4.
Okay, so we're okay. So that's great. That kind of gives me an idea of which ones are which.
And same with the LCP grant is basically each bullet is task 1, task 2, task 3.
Which page?
Page 5.
Oh, okay. And I think in the long run, this will help us because this gives more visibility to the city council and also more transparency to the public. And hopefully we'll be able to use that support to get things done a little bit faster. And Trevor's been making good progress with the Coastal Commission in terms of. Great.
Just a question on it. How, just thinking of, clarity for everybody, for myself, selfishly, and then for the public and the council. Under each of these priorities, right? Like current status, planning commission has done everything they can, held up at coastal, just kind of, and then the detail, that way, if all I want to do is see SB2, okay, it's at the coastal commission, we've done everything we can, good. Just, really kind of.
and you could put those in different colored print. Coastal Commission blue and planning red, something.
But, something
I'd have to
denotes the
print the
status. Yeah,
What?
I'd have to print the council.
Oh, okay.
yeah. Just
Council secretaries.
status. Planning commission's done everything they can.
Mayor-
You get the point, right? Yeah,
Mayor Kelly has asked for some Gantt charts.
okay.
So I don't know that we'll be able to go that far because it's a little complicated with the interactions. But at the same time, there has to be some sort of visual reference to each of these things. Yeah. So that's why I suggest let her decide what she wants by giving it to her.
Yeah, I started a Gantt chart and, yeah, like, do I just do the main task? You said, and
Well,
it,
that's
yeah, it got,
Yeah.
because I have Gantt charts for some of the grants, but some of them were passed already. And we've gotten extensions. So, yeah, I didn't finish that.
Okay, any other questions, comments on this agenda item? Once again, I'll open it up for public comment if there's any public comment. Hearing none,
Is
seeing
there
none.
anything not on the list that someone wants to work on?
Yeah, so these are big items and any big construction items that we should be thinking about or that's gonna happen. Just to kind of maybe get on the list, like I'm sure the pier is gonna be done.
They're gonna do, yeah, the parking lot next summer down in the harbor. And I think they're supposed to keep the city appraised of what's going on.
What about the interpretive center? What about the interpretive center? Is that part of the parking lot?
No, that's a separate project and I don't know that it's gonna be ready next summer. Other than that, I mean, the city has been getting a lot of sort of street improvement grants. I'm not I know there's a HSIP. They're gonna put new guardrails and some crosswalks and more flashing crosswalk signs, so it's.
In gravel in the bottom.
Yeah, we told Dave and I told Josh, you wanna. Sure, that gets the council before. Other than that, I think the construction is on the water pipes and tanks, so that's outside.
Next item, agenda item is commissioner reports. Anyone have anything they'd like to report?
Okay, it's going to be STR committee met last, I think it's Tuesday, the 6th of December. So Dick Bruce, Jan Nash, John, Jack Beaupre, he wasn't there, he was out of town, and then myself as the planning commission. And we are working on a city survey. So we can ask the city questions about STRs.
Residents or?
Residents, yeah. So a couple questions. Did you receive the 24-hour STR contact list mailed in February on lime green paper, which tells you how to contact the responsible person managing the Trinidad STR? Did you know that the city of Trinidad receives substantial tax dollars from the operation of STR? Have you ever filed a formal complaint with the city of Trinidad regarding the STR? Do you know how to get in contact with the STR committee to share feedback or concerns? And then do you feel like the overall tone in town regarding STRs, their impact on the town and the revenue they provide to the city is positive or negative? We just got a couple of questions together. Some came from another survey, from another city. So my idea for this survey was to define STR. So in the survey, it's going to say the city's municipal code defines a short-term rental as a rental of any dwelling in whole or part within the city of Trinidad to any persons for transient use other than 1, a permitted bed and breakfast, 2, ongoing month-to-month tenancy granted to the same renter for the same dwelling, 3, 1 less than 30-day rental per year, or 4, a house exchange for which there is no payment. So it's going to be an anonymous survey. And they can bring it back by mail or drop it in the city hall. So the committee wanted to get a feeling for how the community felt, and especially since now we've got so much money from the QT tax. There's been a lot of conversation. I don't know, I've had some community conversation about what are they going to do with the money, and I asked at the voter night when they League of Women Voters, you know, with more money, could they do something with enforcement? So there's also a question, do you have any concerns regarding STRs in your neighborhood? So we just want to get a idea how the town feels, and our plan is to bring this survey outline to the joint meeting of the city council, the planning commission, and get everybody's feedback, because I personally didn't think that we could send it out, you know, without the approval, you know, of council, you know, the planning commission was SCR ordinance. So anyway, that was our main, and then Dick Bruce, the chairman, was going to give people at the meeting an outline of what we did this year. We only met, I don't know, I think maybe 3 times. But overall, the committee started in 2020, and we've had, I think, so some of the members aren't sure that we should still have it. So that's something that you might think about. Council might think about at this joint meeting at the Unity. So I will definitely be part of that.
So you are the planning commission representative.
Right, until they get someone else that.
So that's another thing to think about who wants to be. We'll have to do committee assignments.
Right.
Committee
But
assignments.
anyway, I think, that this, I don't know, we haven't had a survey. And, I don't know how many people would fill it out, but it's anonymous, so they might, want to do that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other commissioner reports?
I think that one thing that jumps out at me that I was always impressed with is how the positioning of the short-term rentals. Like, did you know that none are right next to each other? Or if they are, they're only in a certain area to like on the survey to help people understand that you got regular neighbors living right next door to this short-term rental, and even the community members, that a lot of thought has gone into spreading out and making it good for everybody. That's what jumped out at me right on that survey. I bet people don't really understand how much thought has gone into making that system good.
Yeah, well, especially as we work on it a lot, the ordinance, and I'm still flabbergasted at the 100 feet. Well, there can be a neighbor, a house, and then there can be an STR 100 feet away.
The only restriction is they can't abut property lines.
Yeah, well, I mean, they can't be,
Adjacent, right? We put that restriction,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
but that is probably the main concern in town, in the neighborhood. Is where they're located. At one point I had 4 or 5 in my backyard. Because I have a big backyard.
It's gonna be a good meeting on the 24th.
Right, yeah.
Any other reports?
Briefly, Water Advisory Committee met. City's making good progress on transitioning local control back to our water plant. And yeah, there's some discussion about oversight responsibilities of the advisory committee versus the city council, where those roles should lie. And we made some good progress on that.
Good.
So who is running the water plant right now? Amy?
No, Cena is our newer employee, and he is basically in essence running it. He is still awaiting some paperwork from the state and to get kind of to that point where he's 100% comfortable. But Coleman Engineering has backed off a tremendous amount, and they're more
So
consultant as needed.
what's his name? Is it or her?
It's his last name,
Soleimani?
Cena Soleimani. Yeah,
Okay, did I see?
you probably
Does he
have.
have a
Yeah,
water truck? I mean,
he has an undercover truck. It doesn't have city logos on it. I saw it the other day when he was driving around.
Oh,
Got some new magnets, I guess.
Anything else? Second.
Yeah, I think my staff report is
It's right
part of
there.
that. Yeah, it's what I'm working on, and I will. Do you want to do new committee assignments and chair in January, or wait till February for that? So we have a little time to settle in.
I like February.
That's fine. Sure. Sure. All right. Any changes or amendments or deletions on future agenda items?
I think we should, as a planning commission, think about how the wind, offshore wind is gonna affect Trinidad.
Interesting point. Yeah, yeah, very good.
It's coming.
All indications are it might, yes. Yeah,
did you
okay.
read the Michael Bickford editorial or article on the wind? I'll try to get that, because he doesn't think it's gonna be a view thing. Yeah.
That's 20 miles.
Not 20 miles,
I was worried about that.
What'd you say, not?
not, they're gonna be 20 miles.
Yeah, well, that's what this article says. I'll try to get a hold of Michael. I taught school.
They always
It's
show,
a really good article that convinced me that, okay, it's gonna be.
yeah, and they always show pictures of them with a flat ocean. But when the ocean's going, it's gonna be fun out there. I mean, but if we see the red light, that's what I'm like, I don't know how they're gonna do the lighting. We might get a lot more ship action. We might, I don't know, fishermen. I don't know, just. as a-
Fishermen definitely are worried. I think. I mean, that's where the trawl grounds and particularly are, so
Down
partial, yeah. But I think also one of the things I found really interesting is. So what they're looking at is constructing these things for the entire coast here in Humboldt Bay, which that's exciting. That seems like that's kind of a great opportunity for Humboldt Bay. But these things are so big that they barely fit through the jaws. So to get just a blade in or out, they're gonna have to shut down the entrance to Humboldt Bay. So no boats can get in or out while they're moving these, which that's kind of, yeah, anyway. But yeah, and the lease area goes all the way up to off Trinidad.
Well, there's clearly challenges that are above and beyond anything that is going to next 3 or 4 years, that's for sure. And then just the infrastructure of getting the power out of Humboldt County is, it's billions. And that's going to be the choke point, I'm afraid.
Yeah, they can't get the power into Humboldt County.
Yeah, Sohum's is out of power, right? So-
Yeah, and even the North Arcata grid, which includes Cal Poly.
That's been amended.
Did they fix it?
Yeah, they came back and said, okay, we can handle you.
I was really surprised.
Yeah, that was quite the revelation, yeah. Okay, anything else?
I did have just one question for staff, I guess, for Anton and Trevor. And tonight was a great example. Is it possible on a per packet basis to paginate just a package? This is packet page 1, in
Yes.
addition to the regular one. That way,
Like the council, they do it for the council.
do they? Okay, I've never
Yeah.
paid attention to that, but that would.
I've never done, yes, okay.
You know, back in what page?
And I think I can even do that automatically when I put together the
As a
PDF
PDF,
now, it'll
okay.
do its own, yeah.
Should be able to.
It used to have to be like done by hand.
Right.
Anything else?
Thank you, all of you, for working with me, and thank you for the K. And all come to the meetings, some of them.
I was going to
I
say,
really learned a lot from Trevor. It was really interesting, and keep your eye on Mr. Detail. Between him and Cheryl Kelly. Is really getting moving.
and I was going to say, everyone have a wonderful holiday, but then I realized we're all going to be back here on the 20.
No, that's January.
January, okay. So I will say. You're right, you're absolutely right. The brain cramp.
You can go ahead and take the notes and do some detail.
Okay,
Thank you.
we are adjourned.
And these are for us from the city, yeah.
I thought they were here last week.
No, yeah, the council got their own and then we get.
Anton, can I pray with you?
I don't have one. This is crazy.
I mean, you have to tie a new tag on it because it says welcome. Instead of that.
Just try.
Oh,
No, you know what?